Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. Joining me is Ben Schreckinger. He is a national political correspondent for Politico, and his new book is The Bidens, Inside the First Family's 50-Year Rise to Power. Ben, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me, Aaron. I'm glad to be here.
Congratulations on this book. I want to start with the headline finding from it, which is that when it comes to this controversy that arose shortly before the November 2020 election about Hunter Biden's laptop, these emails come out showing that Hunter Biden was leveraging his family connections to pursue various business dealings. The response from the Biden campaign and from the media was essentially that all of this was unconfirmed and even possibly Russian disinformation. For this book, you've confirmed the contents of this laptop, at least some of the contents of this laptop. Can you talk about just how this controversy arose and what you were able to confirm yourself?
Sure. So, famously in mid-October of 2020, the New York Post began publishing a series of stories based on what it said were the leaked contents of Hunter Biden's laptop. Uh, the story it provided as to how it came into possession of these files was that Hunter had dropped off a laptop and a hard drive at a repair shop in Wilmington, Delaware, not far from where his father lives, and forgot about them. And that after 90 days per this repair contract, the hardware became the property of John Paul McIsaac, the owner of this MacBook shop or Mac shop in Wilmington, and that he later passed them along to Rudy Giuliani, and that Giuliani and Bannon got them to the Post in the waning weeks of the presidential campaign, and there was immediate suspicion of this story of, was this legitimate information? Was this backstory real? Was this Russian disinformation, as a number of former intelligence officials claimed it appeared to be? And it kicked off a debate about censorship as well. Twitter blocked links to this, even prevented people for a time from DMing it, suspended the New York Post Twitter account for a time. Jack Dorsey pretty quickly said he regretted that Twitter had done that. And I, in the course of researching the book, had the chance to corroborate parts of this cache of leaked files. I obtained them from people working with Steve Bannon, people who had been working to disseminate them back before the election. I was able to confirm the two emails that were at the center of the first two big New York Post stories, one in which Vadim Pisarsky is thanking Hunter for the opportunity to meet his father. Pisarsky was an advisor to the board of Burisma, and another where there's a breakdown of a proposed equity structure for a venture that Hunter and Jimmy Biden, Joe's younger brother, were considering entering into with a Chinese oil executive, Yi Jinping, and others. That includes this line 10 held by H for the big guy with a question mark. I spoke to somebody who had independent access to Hunter Biden's emails for a time. They did recall seeing both of those emails, said that those were real. And then I was able to corroborate some of the other emails from the cache that were not at the center of the early New York Post stories, just by talking to a couple of people who had been in touch with Hunter Biden in the months before his father kicked off his latest presidential campaign, described to them the emails when they were sent, the communications, and they said, yes, those are real communications I had with Hunter Biden. And then finally, I obtained from the Swedish government under Sweden's freedom of information law some correspondence that Hunter Biden had with his landlord when he had an office at the Swedish embassy complex in Washington. And the emails released by the Swedish government matched emails that were in this cache. So what I can say is that there are at least many files that are genuine. It's sort of impossible to rule out that something that's not genuine has been slipped in there. I wasn't really able to prove or disprove the provenance story that was offered by the New York Post. They offered a detailed story on the record as to how they came into possession of these emails, and Hunter Biden hasn't really said one way or another. He said he's not sure. He doesn't remember if he dropped off a laptop at this MacBook shop in the relevant time period. So we're left with what the New York Post says versus Hunter Biden saying, I'm not sure.
I think because the laptop originated publicly with Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, that made it easier for the media to ignore it. I mean, plus you had the specter of the Russian boogeyman, former intelligence officials claiming that this looks like Russian disinformation, even though they also acknowledged they had no evidence for it. But everything about the laptop story makes sense to me. I mean, you've corroborated now some of the emails. Hunter Biden was a drug addict at the time, so it's quite plausible to me that he would forget that he dropped off a laptop at a computer store, and the laptop even had a sticker on it, right, from Beau Biden's foundation or one of the Biden foundations.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And when you look at this in context, it is plausible that he left this behind. He also lost another laptop around the same time period when the one that ended up in the hands of the New York Post was supposed to have been left by him at this repair shop. He left one at the office of a psychologist up in Newburyport, Massachusetts, where he'd been seeking counseling and trying to get his life together around the winter of 2018, 2019. Left it behind, forgot about it, and then the DEA raided this person's office and seized the laptop. And Hunter was able to get that one back because his laptop wasn't relevant to whatever the DEA was investigating. But it just sort of shows that he's, leaving possessions behind, important possessions, things that would have, that would contain sensitive material. And there's just sort of a general chaos that surrounds his life that threatens at several points to unleash collateral damage on his father's presidential ambitions.
So what to you about the Hunter Biden emails are the most damning for Joe Biden himself? I always thought the biggest scandal here was the media scandal, just refusing to report on the contents because some anonymous officials claimed they might be Russian disinformation, even though, again, they had no evidence for that. And I also thought the most damning thing about Hunter Biden was already publicly known, which is that he got this really profitable board seat on the board of directors for the Ukrainian energy company Burisma not long after his father, Joe Biden, helped orchestrate a coup in Ukraine. And now Hunter Biden, with no energy sector experience, gets paid, over $50,000 per month at least to sit on Burisma's board. But in terms of what came out of the laptop emails, what to you there was most damning for Joe Biden himself?
Yeah, well, first of all, I should caution that there's been a lot of additional reporting on emails in the New York Post and in the Daily Mail that I don't get into in the book, simply because I wanted to stick in terms of things that were significant or potentially significant to things that I had found independent corroboration for. And so what I do discuss in the book is these first two emails that are at the center of the initial New York Post reporting. And one is Vadim Posarsky, this advisor to the board of Burisma, thanking Hunter for an opportunity to meet Joe Biden back in 2015 when Joe Biden's sitting vice president overseeing U.S. policy in Ukraine. And that in and of itself is, it's not the Teapot Dome scandal, but it does, if a meeting did take place and the Biden campaign has denied that any meeting took place, there is some additional evidence that's been brought forward that they may have been at the same dinner with Hunter Biden and others at Cafe Milano the night before. We know that Joe Biden was there, and we haven't heard definitively from anybody about whether Vadim Posarsky was there or not, but there was a New York Post email that lists a Vadim on the guest list for that dinner. It would just renew the original critique of this board appointment, that it wasn't about the advice and expertise that Hunter Biden, who did not have experience to speak of in Ukraine or in the energy sector, would bring to Burisma. It was about his connection to his father. So if he were facilitating any sort of encounter with someone affiliated with Burisma at this time, while Burisma is under suspicion of corruption, while its owner, Mykola Zlochevsky, is being condemned by our State Department for his alleged corruption. That hammers home why people were upset about this gig in the first place. And then with this this second email, this 10 held by H for the big guy question mark, Joe Biden's campaign has said he's never discussed having a family member hold any equity for him or being involved in a venture with his family or being involved in an overseas venture. So they've denied that Joe Biden, was having someone secretly hold equity in a venture. But it just raises all sorts of questions of, well, then why was this email ever sent? Was Hunter Biden telling people that he was going to hold equity on his father's behalf? This venture in particular, Yi Jinming, has been linked by the Financial Times to the Chinese military intelligence community. This is the CEFC executive who was involved in this aborted deal that's being discussed in that email. And he's gone missing in China, and there's been a report on Chinese state TV that he's been implicated in a corruption trial of another official by prosecutors there. And so it's just the question of what was what were these members of the first family doing in this business deal? We haven't had Joe Biden address the question of whether he ever discussed this deal that was coming together with Tony Bobulinski, who has come forward and said, I did discuss this deal with Joe Biden in 2017 in Los Angeles. And it just speaks to the broader issue, which comes up a lot in the book, which is that members of the family for decades have pursued business deals, gotten loans, otherwise in their personal business dealings and financial dealings, done things that raise questions of whether they're getting favorable treatment because they're related to Joe Biden, whether they're taking money from people who have an interest in ingratiating themselves with Joe Biden, and it's just a can of worms that Joe Biden doesn't want to have opened up.
This business associate of Hunter Biden's, Tony Bobulinski, who came forward before the election, he was a darling of right-wing media. Trump heavily promoted him. You followed up with him, right? And you tried to get him to provide you with more evidence to support his claims. And as I understand your book, he wasn't very forthcoming. And I'm wondering, was that part of the problem here? I do think that the Trump side, Giuliani, Bannon, that they embellished some of their claims about Biden, or at least made claims about Biden that they couldn't support with facts.
Yeah, that's right. And that's, even before Bobulinski appears on the scene at the end of this campaign, Trump and Giuliani are saying that Joe Biden's role in firing Viktor Shokin, who was the prosecutor general of Ukraine, was part of a corrupt attempt to help Burisma and Zlochevsky by getting rid of Shokin so that Shokin couldn't investigate them for corruption. And there are a lot of problems with that claim that they're putting forth. One of the big ones is that a lot of U.S. allies had already expressed their displeasure with Shokin well before Joe Biden steps in and essentially forces the government of Ukraine to oust him. And part of their complaint with Shokin is that he's not doing enough to crack down on corruption. And so what Biden was doing was consistent with what others in Washington had been calling for, or at least had been expressing displeasure with Shokin, what Western allies had also expressed. And it's also not clear what exactly was going on with Shokin and whether he had investigations open that he was pursuing or not at that time with Burisma. Some people have said this theory doesn't make any sense at all because the cases related to Burisma and Zlochevsky were closed by the time this happened. There is a Ukrainian Interfax report, though, from about a month before Shokin gets to the boot that says his office was involved in freezing Zlochevsky's assets in cooperation with a British investigation of Zlochevsky. And so it's murky, but certainly Trump and Giuliani fell far short of proving what they claimed. And then with Bobulinski, he appears, he's working, he appears in October after these New York Post reports start to appear. And he says, yeah, and he's on that 10 for 10 held by H for the big guy email. And he says, yes, that email means what you think it means. It means that Hunter was considering holding equity on behalf of his father. The big guy does mean Joe Biden. Um, and he says that he met with Joe Biden in Los Angeles in 2017, around the time of the Milken conference that Biden attended out there. And and we talked in general terms about this deal that we were pursuing, and Joe Biden was clearly familiar with it. Um, and Bobby Lewinsky wouldn't sit down with me. He wouldn't get on the phone with me. He wanted me to just refer to what he'd said publicly elsewhere. And that made it difficult for me because this was the closing weeks of a presidential election. He was, making a contentious claim. He was working with a presidential campaign. You really want to sit down with somebody and talk it out with them and see what they can show you. And he did cooperate with other media outlets, Fox News, the Wall Street Journal, perhaps even Sinclair, and others, and gave some statements. But it made it much harder to report on what he was saying. Now, there are also reasons to not doubt the substance of much of what he was saying. He was involved in this deal that the Bidens were pursuing. He did not have some long history as a Republican donor or activist. In fact, at least on the national level, his donations had tended to go to Democrats, including Ro Khanna out in California. Ro Khanna made some statement saying that he knows Tony Bob Bielinski to be an honorable person. And what he was saying was not completely sensational based on what else we knew. He was saying, yeah, this email says what it kind of looks like it says. And yeah, I talked to Joe Biden about this deal a little bit. He wasn't coming out and saying, I saw Joe Biden take a suitcase full of cash or whatever other sort of claim. And it just sort of speaks to the difficulty of parsing the truth in a situation like this, where there's the queer political element in a presidential campaign. There's foreign aspects to this. Xi Jinping, one of the most important people for understanding this, has disappeared from public view in China. And so there's a lot of mystery that surrounds it still, I think.
It just seems that this story was such a victim of partisanship, partisan hackery, where, especially I have to say on the Democratic side, in the media, just refusing to cover the story and taking at face value this ridiculous suggestion that it's Russian disinformation, even though there's no evidence for it. And I see you as one of these rare reporters who's trying to do their job and look at what the facts are, both, how, regardless of the partisan utility. And you have a very nuanced portrayal. The emails to me strike me as not as damning to Joe Biden as the Trump camp wanted to portray them as, but still they do, as you point out, raise serious questions. And it just stands out to me that this story was not pursued by most of the media. It was actually willfully ignored. And I'm wondering, now that you've authenticated some of the emails in the Hunter Biden laptop, what has been the reaction to your book from the same media outlets that basically refuse to cover the story based on the fact that it might be Russian disinformation, or this based on the fear that it was all just dirt from Giuliani and Bannon?
What I'll say is that for Politico, the instructions have always been report without fear or favor, and I've been grateful for that, and did a ton of reporting on Biden relatives' business dealings throughout the whole presidential campaign, from the primary down through the closing weeks of the campaign. In terms of the response to this news, it's turned up in some places and not in others. Obviously, the New York Post has been, happy to tout this corroboration of their reporting, which was, so maligned and questioned at the time. And what I'll say is that I'm grateful for independent voices like yours and others that exist out there that just add to the perspectives and the reporting that goes on. And I've had a lot of success talking. I was on recording a podcast with Matt Taibbi the other day, um, and I think that that's a good and healthy thing. And so I'm grateful for voices like yours that are interested in the book and the findings.
And Hunter Biden now has a new controversy when it comes to his artwork, selling his paintings, a task, I think, an interest that I think he only recently took up in the last few years, selling his paintings for something like $500,000 a piece. Can you catch us up to speed on that? Who was buying the paintings? Who was buying the paintings? Is Hunter Biden not meeting them as the Biden administration initially promised? What's the story there?
Yeah, and you read a book like this and it's all focused on the relatives' business dealings, and you say, well, this is the pattern I found. I wonder if it'll be relevant. And, as it turns out, as this book is coming out, it remains quite relevant and passed as prologue, because once again, Hunter Biden's, the way that he's making money is making headlines and causing controversy. He has recently pivoted to a career in art, and he's focusing right now on painting. This is something he's had interest in it for at least a few years, based on my reporting for the book. When he was in Newburyport a few years ago, he was taking painting lessons and flying lessons. But he is a debut artist who's charging up to $500,000 for a work, and that is an astronomical, extraordinary sum for a debut artist to be charging. And so the question becomes, if someone is going to pay $500,000 or even $75,000 or $100,000 for a Hunter Biden painting, are they doing it because this artwork is just so compelling? Are they doing it because of the notoriety of Hunter Biden, or are they perhaps doing it in order to somehow ingratiate themselves with President Biden because they're looking for some sort of favorable treatment from the United States government? And the White House, in talking about how this is going to go down, has said that we've decided that the best way to handle this, in consultation with Hunter's representatives, is to have the buyers remain anonymous. And so Hunter Biden won't know who's buying his art, and neither will the public. And this immediately drew, frankly, howls from ethics experts who said that somebody anonymously giving $500,000 or $100,000 to the president's son immediately invites questions about whether they're doing it to somehow try to get influence with Joe Biden, with Hunter Biden's father, or ingratiate themselves to the Bidens. And so it was sort of, ethics experts, considered this sort of bad enough when they first heard about it. And then there was a new wrinkle that I think CBS News first reported, which was, Hunter Biden will actually be meeting face-to-face with potential buyers. And that undermines the anonymity of the process. And the White House response on this has been, yes, he'll be meeting face-to-face with these buyers, but these conversations will not pertain to the buying of art. And talk to a dean or a professor at George Washington who just sort of said, essentially, give me a break. He's meeting with them. They may then go buy these artworks. It would be trivially easy for them to signal that they had actually, purchased it, and for how much. And so this is the ongoing drama now. He had his first art show in the last week or so. I've seen a report that there have been some purchases, but at the end of the day, we don't really know who's paying him for what. And so these questions are once again swirling.
And this is where I think the partisan hypocrisy has to be acknowledged if one wants to be consistent. If Don Jr., Trump's son, was selling paintings for $500,000, or if, again, he had gotten a lucrative board seat on a Ukrainian gas company for $50,000 a month or even more, according to some reports, I mean, the media would be up in arms. But the response to Hunter Biden's dealings on this front gets a very muted reaction. I do want to ask you about one thing. There, as corrupt as I think it is, Hunter Biden's ability to exploit his father's position, there is something endearing about Hunter and tragic about him, obviously, and something endearing about his relationship with his father. There is. I mean, that they lose Hunter Biden's mother when Hunter is very young, and also Hunter Biden's sister in a car accident. Hunter and his brother Beau are in the car. They survive. And then Hunter Biden in adulthood develops a very serious drug addiction, which he's only, come through recently. And in the picture we've gotten of their relationship around that, I mean, even from some of the emails on the laptop or communication on the laptop, Joe Biden comes across as a very supportive father throughout this process. I'm wondering if, given that Joe Biden also authored the crime bill, which led to a huge expansion in mass incarceration, from your reporting, have you heard anything about whether Biden and Hunter have ever grappled with the fact that Hunter's really benefited from his privilege and emerging from his drug addiction and his other legal troubles very unscathed, while meanwhile his father, Joe Biden, authored legislation that harshly punished people with drug problems, putting them in prison?
Yeah, the book sort of points this out, the real disparity there. I don't know how much they've grappled with that, individually or together, as father and son. Obviously, it's something that's been pointed out again and again in the press, and has given more impetus for calls for Joe Biden to do more to reform these sentencing disparities, or grant clemency, or find some way to address what are now widely seen as the excesses of the war on crime and his role in it back then. And that's obviously, a very poignant personal counterpoint to what Joe Biden was doing in public life, and sort of speaks to, I think the value of providing personal and family context in the stories of world leaders, and integrating that with what they're doing in their public life, and seeing how, seeing where the hypocrisies lie, and where the family experience is influencing them for good or for ill. But you raise a very important point.
And so Beau Biden, Hunter Biden's brother, he dies of brain cancer in 2015. It's well known that Joe Biden's always favored Beau Biden, always saw him as his successor. There have been reports that Joe Biden blames the burn pits in Iraq, at least partly on Beau Biden's death. Beau Biden served in Iraq. Joe Biden was instrumental in voting for the war on Iraq, and sort of helped lead the Senate support for the war in Iraq. Do you know anything about that? Whether Biden has ever record with his own role in supporting the Iraq war, and then how that might have impacted his son and possibly even cost him his life?
I know that Joe Biden at times, or at least once, has said that that's the one vote he regrets, or the vote he regrets most, is the vote to authorize the war in Iraq. He said something similar, though, about Glass-Steagall repeal, and I don't know actually much about his view that Beau's brain cancer may have been related to his time in Iraq. I think that's fascinating, and I might actually connect with you after we're done taping to take a look at that myself. I wish I knew more.
And what you do write about in the book is that Beau himself thought that he might have post-traumatic stress disorder from his time serving in Iraq.
That's right, and that's part of, I believe, the initial confusion when he starts to have what I think they first think is an aneurysm. Obviously, Joe Biden had a couple of aneurysms after his first presidential run that nearly killed him. And so Beau Biden after his time in Iraq, at times, I think while running, he would sort of start to lose lose himself and need to stop and steady himself, and thought it may have been post-traumatic stress disorder, but now is probably the early signs of this brain cancer.
Let's talk a bit about Joe Biden's ascent to the presidency. As you say, after half a century in Washington, he finally arrives to the White House after a lot of people had counted him out, including in 2020 during the primary. But first, going back to 2016, when Obama is leaving office and Hillary Clinton is entering the race, Biden says at the time that he just wasn't ready, especially after Beau's death. I'm wondering, did you think that he faced too much pressure from both Obama and Clinton not to run, that they didn't think he could win and they were sort of anointing Hillary as Obama's successor, and that was possibly the driving factor in Biden's decision not to run then, not, as he said publicly, his family?
Yeah, my sense with any decision like this is that there are going to be a number of factors, but it is clear both from some public signals at the time and press coverage at the time, and what Joe Biden has said and written in his second memoir since then, that he very much felt like Obama had settled on Hillary Clinton as his chosen successor. You can tell that Joe Biden is a little bit hurt by that. Someone who has felt underestimated at many, many points in his career. And obviously hindsight is 2020, but given the way that 2016 played out, and the coalition that Trump ended up eking out a win with, Joe Biden took some vindication from that, and probably rightfully so, in believing that he may have been the better candidate for the Democratic Party in 2016.
And 2020, he is vindicated again when he wins, when everybody, including pundits across the spectrum and other members of the Democratic Party, had counted him out in the primary after he loses the first two contests of that race.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, one theme of this book is that over the long stretch of Joe Biden's career, he's been left for dead politically more than once. Was actually left for dead in a more literal way after flaming out of the 1988 Democratic primary, when he has a couple of aneurysms, and at one point a priest is actually administering last rites to him in a hospital bed, and Jill Biden comes across this scene and shoos the man away, and Joe Biden, of course, recovers from this. Was sort of left for dead after his gaffe in describing Obama as, clean and articulate, at the beginning of the 2008 primary process, and he flames out pretty quickly there as well, and is sort of resuscitated by being picked for Obama's ticket. And of course, part of the reason that he's picked is that he's viewed as someone with no political future by that time. So he's not going to be, maneuvering for himself. He'll be viewed as a more reliable number two to Obama. And obviously, that calculation isn't totally correct, and that he's the president now. And there is a lesson that he sort of starts out his first memoir with, that the most important thing that his father taught him is that when you get knocked down by life, you get up again and again. And I think you see that in just the sheer number of times that he has continued to hang on in politics and continued to pursue the presidency, and finally he's made it.
The book is called The Bidens: Inside the First Family's 50-Year Rise to Power. Ben Schreckinger, the national political correspondent for Politico, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me, Aaron.